I'm Christopher Hawthorne. I'm the architecture critic for the Los Angeles Times. I think the legacy of what Olmsted Jr. tried but failed to do rather than what he produced in Southern California is the work that I think and write the most about. In particular, the 1930 plan that the Olmsted brothers and Harlan Bartholomew proposed for the entire region of Southern California, an open space plan that was commissioned by the Chamber of Commerce and ultimately never built, is an example of the kind of ambition that landscape architecture can produce, and offers, I think, a lot of lessons and some cautionary tales about how park planning ought to proceed in the 21st century. So more than the designs themselves, I think we're looking back at the political culture that produced that plan and its incredible ambition, and also the political culture that ended up killing it and not pursuing it. So both for the ambition of what was attempted and for the political realities that kept it from happening, I think on both sides of that equation we continue to look back and see lessons for contemporary Los Angeles and Southern California. I think the hardest issue and the most important issue in Southern California when it comes to park space and open space is really the challenge of creating new park space, carving new open space out of a region that's really built out. We think of Los Angeles as being sprawling and very low density, but in fact the open space has been claimed. There are no more green spaces to discover or to turn into parks. It's really a built-out metropolitan area across an incredible scale. And so the challenge now, as the city gets more crowded and gets denser, is carving out park space from that existing built-out urban landscape. And it's a particularly crucial issue in Los Angeles because we don't have a lot of park space per capita. And in large part that's due to the suburbanization of the region in the 20th century. There was a feeling that you could come to Los Angeles and have, instead of access to one central park in the middle of the city, you could have a little slice of Central Park in your own backyard. So essentially, instead of building one major metropolitan park or several major metropolitan parks, we built thousands and thousands of miniature Central Parks in people's backyards. And in fact, the Olmsted vision, rather than playing out on a metropolitan scale, was really being privatized during much of the 20th century in Los Angeles, as was the case in many cities around the country. So everybody thought about garden space, park space, open space as something that was part of their residential slice of the city, and that they could have that space in their own garden, their own yard. And what that meant was, over time, there wasn't a constituency for building new public parks, because everybody thought, even as a middle-class family, you could move to Los Angeles and have access to this suburban ideal where you had park space in your backyard. And what that meant over time is that there wasn't money, there wasn't the kind of political support for creating new park space. And that has left us now in the 21st century, as it becomes more and more expensive for people to buy into that single-family ideal, and as the city gets more crowded, it's left Los Angeles with a real deficit when it comes to park space. So we have famous and magnificent parks and open space on the periphery of the region, in Griffith Park, and the beaches, of course. But in most neighborhoods, particularly the most urbanized neighborhoods of Los Angeles, we have relatively few neighborhood parks, parks that people can walk to from their houses. That's a real deficit that politically Los Angeles is still grappling with how to address. I think the political debate about these issues really is changing in Los Angeles. I think because it's harder and harder for people to afford a single-family house in the city, and because we're building more apartments, more multifamily housing, and just in general because the city is getting denser, and in fact the region is getting much denser, there is beginning to be more of a constituency for open space and the creation of new park space. So people who live in apartments are much more interested in the park space in their neighborhood at the most basic level, and they become supporters, constituents for a new attention to park space, both the creation of parks, the design of parks, and the maintenance of existing parks. So I think that constituency, which is really key to the stewardship and the creation of park spaces in any city, is growing in Los Angeles, growing in number, growing more vocal over time. So even though we've neglected open space, park space planning for a long time in Los Angeles, or we've thought about it as something that was connected surprisingly enough to the residential development of the region. I think now people are seeing that we need to pay attention to how to create new park space, how to raise money to produce more parks that are really usable and useful for people in their own neighborhoods or their own communities. So we're at the beginning of a process that I think is really beginning to change the political conversation in Los Angeles about these issues. I think the discussion this morning has really paved the way for my panel at the end of the day, setting up some themes that are really running through all of the conversations. I think the first one chiefly is politics and what landscape designers like the Olmsted brothers, like those who have followed in the footsteps of Olmsted Jr., the attention that they've paid to the political side of the equation and not just the design side. In other words, what it takes to get parks paid for, built, what it takes to have them maintained over time. And the real legacy of the Olmsted office, it seems to me, is real sophistication about the political side of that equation. And I think that's one of the threads that I think we need to carry through to the second part of the conversations. And then also, I think some attention to design. What is the role that design plays? We haven't heard too much about that, and I'm hoping in the second half of the conversations, particularly in the final panel of the day, which I'll be moderating, a little more discussion about precisely the role of design and whether, as we bring forward the Olmsted legacy as it connects to politics, for example, and some democratic ideals, what that means for design. Do we need to also carry through a kind of 19th century, early 20th century idea of design, or can we think in more contemporary terms about marrying design and innovative design with some old-fashioned ideas about public space and democracy, populism, humanism, all of those things that were important to Olmsted Jr.